For the Western world as a whole, the popularizer of what you might in general terms call a Nietzschean view of the world or an anti-theodicy is Freud, okay? We've all been terribly affected by Freud's idea that, how shall I put this? First of all, that religion is about illusion and wishes, all right? That religion is a product of our wishes for relief from suffering and evil, and it's something that we actually ought to grow up from. This is Freud's view. One of the interesting things that Freud does, which I suppose is also quite like Nietzsche's, he doesn't really distinguish anymore between natural and moral evils. You had this very sharp separation in what I've called the modern period, going from the Lisbon earthquake roughly to Nietzsche, through Nietzsche. But Freud sees no, I mean, it's when he talks about evil and suffering, what he says is suffering caused by other human beings makes us more unhappy because we think of it as superfluous. But he describes them as if it was all sort of one of a kind. And of course, for the infant, it is. He's talking a bit from the infant's perspective. And from that point of view, you know, whether you hit me or whether I get hit by lightning, or whether I'm hungry or whether I'm ill, it's all pain. And it's all pain that suggests, as Freud put it in a wonderful but bleak passage, life is too hard for us. There are all kinds of things that we do to escape from that. He says drugs are excellent, except that they cause risks, but drugs is just a form of escaping from reality. I mean, it's very interesting. He runs through these things with no moralizing. And of course, Freud took a lot of cocaine. He wrote a lot of his early work under the influence of cocaine. It wasn't illegal, he just did it. We can do drugs, but they're risky. He said love is the best thing, but it's very, very rare. He said love is the one most complete way of finding some kind of joy and relief from suffering and evil, and a way of coping with reality. And he said it's so good that anybody who's ever experienced it would never try anything else, but it doesn't happen very often. So he says creative action, creative activity is a way of coping with painful reality. And it's rather a good one because it also has these byproducts that people create things. But essentially, and this I find much more problematic, people create things because they're in pain. It's less of the case that there's you don't see in Freud enough of a description of a human need simply to know, a human need simply to create, that part of being alive in a joyous way is to create. That's Nietzsche. Freud is darker than Nietzsche. Of course, one has to add, he wrote The Interpretation of Dreams in 1905. I'm almost sure, but I'm not 100% sure about that. But he wrote an awful lot of his work after the First World War, and particularly his works that deal with questions of theodicy and deal with the meaning of life and suffering were all written after the First World War. He also had a correspondence with Einstein about war and why there was war and whether there was anything that could be done to stop it. But it's not hard to understand why somebody who saw all of that really very much from not quite the front but almost the front might conclude that there's a death wish, which is something that he concluded, and that there's sort of sheer joy and sheer affirmation of life is pretty hard to find if you're being absolutely honest about what reality is.